Our first speaker that we're going to welcome is Katie Corker. Katie is the Executive Director of ASAPbio. She's held that position since 2024. She has a PhD in psychology, previously serving as faculty for 12 years. ASAPbio is working to advance research transparency and innovation in life science research communication through preprints and open peer review. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here today to actually not talk about ASAPbio stuff directly, but I'm going to talk instead about updates to the TOP framework. Late last year, we published a preprint describing planned changes to the TOP framework, and so I'm going to run through those changes for you today. Since we only have about 10 minutes, I think this is going to go rather fast, but hopefully there'll be a little bit of time for questions. So I'm here on behalf of the TOP Advisory Board. So there's all the lovely people who are on the TOP Advisory Board. We also have David Meller for the Center for Open Science, who's the sort of liaison between COS and the Advisory Board. So if you're familiar with the TOP guidelines, these came out in 2015. It was a set of 8 different standards with 3 levels of adoption. And the main benefit of this framework is that it allowed journals and other stakeholders to increase transparency and openness of their outputs in a modular way. So journals and other stakeholders can sort of mix and match which standards that they want to apply and which level of adoption they want to take. There have been a lot of uptake in TOP in the last 10 years since it's come out. Over 5,000 journals signed a petition saying that they would consider adopting the TOP standards, and many journals have done so. However, a number of factors have come out as issues prompting revision. So on the occasion of 10 years of TOP, we sought to address these issues. So there has been some inconsistent levels across standards. There were dependencies across standards where it was impossible to achieve a high level on one standard without also changing another standard. There was a lack of applicability for some practices to some methods, so we have made some tweaks there. And there was also poor reliability of scoring for meta-science research that was using the framework that suggested a lack of clarity for some standards. So the revised framework, we think, addresses these issues and is a much stronger framework overall. So we have 3 major classes of revisions to the framework. First of all, there's revisions to the core research practices that are part of TOP. So I said before there were 8 different standards, things like sharing data, code, pre-registration, and so on. So we've made revisions to those practices. We also made revisions to the levels, the 3 different levels of adoptions of those practices, and I'll go through these in a moment. And then finally, we reorganized the structure of the entire framework with 3 different categories of standards. So in addition to research practices like we had before, there are now 2 additional categories of verification practices and verification studies, which I'll explain in a moment. Okay, so first, on the topic of revisions to the research practices. What you see now in the 2025 version of TOP, there are 7 different research practices that are highlighted, including study registration, study protocol, analysis plan, materials transparency, so sharing materials, data transparency, analytic code transparency, and reporting transparency. You might notice there's some adjustments that have been made I'll highlight in a second, but the most important thing that I want to start with is that there are now 3 levels that can be adopted across these 7 practices that are all consistent in a way that they were not consistent before. So if a journal or another stakeholder wants to adopt TOP at level 1, they're asking researchers to disclose whether or not a particular practice has been done. So with respect to study registration, for example, a journal would say you have to disclose, whether or not in the affirmative a study has been registered. The second level is share and cite, and this one, let me see here, the idea is that researchers must share the output of a given practice, and they must also cite its location in a trusted repository. So what this does is it takes a previous standard that was focused on citation and makes clear that it applies across all practices within the framework. So whether someone is sharing materials, data, analysis plan, et cetera, the expectation is that at level 2, those artifacts are being shared in a stable repository, and they're also being cited, not just linked, but cited. Well, level 3, the most interesting, is certify. And the idea here is that an independent party is certifying that a practice has been done to disciplinary best practice standards. What this allows us to do is, across the wide swath of different kinds of scholarship that happens in the academy, there's now room for that disciplinary variability to show up within the framework. So something like data sharing, for example, is going to look very different if you are a computational social scientist than if you are, working in genetics or something like that. What it means for that artifact to be shared at a high level or best practice is going to be very different. Certification, again, also means it's an independent party, so it's the idea is that it's someone outside of the research team. This could be a journal, but it could also be other stakeholders who are doing checking. The services that Brian was mentioning this morning for the Life Cycle Journal, the kinds that are doing this outside checking, very much aligned with this idea of this third level. Okay, so all 7 of these practices now have the same consistent levels, which is very nice. It should make the framework a lot easier to apply. I wanted to highlight some of the other changes to research practices that are shifts from the previous framework. You'll notice that study registration has been relabeled. So before it was pre-registration, now the focus is on registration specifically. This is to bring this practice in line with practice within biomedical areas and other areas that are using registration. The idea here is that the study is entered in a registry, not merely time-stamped or other practices that involve sort of sharing research plans preemptively. So achieving study registration would involve entering, ideally prospectively, a study into a study registry. But separate from the concept of registries, we also have a new standard for study protocols and then an existing standard for analysis plans. This, I think, decouples the idea of registration from other study artifacts in a way that is really nice for working across different disciplines. Some disciplines really focus a lot on their protocols, but not at all on their analysis plans, and some disciplines are the reverse. When you have registration sort of bundled up with protocols and analysis plans, it sort of obscures the parts of the practice that might be important for a given discipline. So here the emphasis is on study registrations as separate from protocols and analysis plans. And the addition of protocols is new from the previous version of DOP. Materials, data, and analytic code transparency are the same labels as they were before. They're essentially unchanged from how they were before. The last standard, reporting transparency, is a relabeling of the existing standard that, actually I can't even remember the old name because it was not great. The idea is that researchers should be using reporting guidelines, reporting standards to report their research transparently. Okay. So beyond the research practices that I've outlined here, we also have additional categories of standards that have been introduced for TOP 2025, and these are new. We've also introduced this overall flowchart here is meant to be a logic model that's sort of describing the conceptual framework underlying TOP. So if TOP is a framework that's meant to increase the verifiability of empirical research claims, then having open and transparent research practices is one way to do that. But additionally, having verification practices and verification studies is another practice that helps us achieve the objective. So very briefly, I'm not even sure actually where my time cues are, so I don't know if I'm going over. Okay, I'm almost there. Verification practices, these were meant to address the idea of dependency between standards. So there's 2 of them, results transparency and computational reproducibility. Briefly, they involve a combination of different practices. So to get results transparency, this would involve comparing a research report to the plans that are outlined in the study registration, the protocol, and the analysis plan, and checking for consistency between those. Computational reproducibility, of course, would be necessitated by having both the data and the code and checking whether it runs and so on. So in order to be able to do these verification practices, you have to have access to multiple of the research practices to do it. Okay, lastly, we have separate study designs as well and publication formats that are focused on verifications. This is not meant to be a comprehensive set. So replication studies, registered reports, multiverse studies, many analyst studies are examples of studies that are designed to probe the verifiability of empirical claims. And the more of these types of studies that we have and the more of other similar studies that we have, the better we'll be able to check whether or not claims are actually verifiable. So, thanks. There's a QR code there if you want to look at the longer form version rather than my 10-minute version.